Eondebatsan Bahebe. Welcome to our training on classroom management strategies, developed by the Kiowa Language and Culture Revitalization Program Professional Development Steering Committee, especially for Kiowa Language Teacher Candidates. Let's get started. Ako. Gom Gedog Yama Akoy Ka Melody Redbird-Post.com. I'm a member of the Kiowa tribe, and I come to you from our traditional and contemporary homelands here in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And I am very excited to be able to present this training for you, and really looking forward to seeing how we can share some classroom management strategies to support you in your Kiowa language classroom settings, regardless of which age group you have chosen to work with. Cool. Our objectives today are to first introduce classroom management principles. Then we want to provide Kiowa language teacher candidates with strategies for managing language classrooms. We want to share examples of effective classroom management practices and explore ways to implement classroom management techniques at various educational levels, and to share the effective use of Kiowa help phrases in your classroom. So let's start with principles of classroom management. So what exactly is classroom management? The general definition is that classroom management is a process by which a teacher manages a classroom so that effective teaching and learning activities can occur. Some principles of classroom management include establishing a quality relationship between teacher and students, having classroom expectations, rules, and procedures, managing yourself as a teacher, maintaining appropriate behavior of teacher and students, and using techniques of motivating students. For quality relationships with students, teachers need to develop warm and responsive relationships with students that have boundaries and consequences. In other words, it's not what you say that matters, it's how you say it. It's best practice to involve all students in creating a classroom management plan. You want to keep things simple when creating rules or classroom norms, such as keeping it to 5 rules or expectations. And that's no matter, regardless of if you are working with a classroom of 3-year-old children versus a classroom of high school age students. You also want to establish rules that cover behaviors that interfere with learning and engagement, like for older students, using the cell phone, for all students, talking loudly or talking at inappropriate times, and how to ask for going to the bathroom or going to another classroom, etc. You also want to refer to rules or classroom norms positively and briefly as reminders to students. To establish relationships, address your students by their name. And also engage your students. Smile at them, tap on their desk, greet them at the door, ask questions that show that you remember something the student mentioned. Let's think about classroom expectations. So a routine is general expectations that are unwritten or actions that happen repetitively within the school day. An example of a routine would be when students enter the classroom, or if they are expected to do something in the beginning of the classroom, such as bell work or seat work. And then a procedure is general expectations for a specific activity. And this is where it's really important to explain specifically what you want students to do. And classroom expectations are typically established around a series of routines in your classroom. So you'll want to ensure that no matter the age group that you're working with, that you have students support you with establishing your classroom expectations. So You might gather all your students in a group on the first day and say, all right, let's figure out what our class rules are. What do we want in our classroom? And you might have students shout out some ideas. Maybe they'll say, no cell phones, or maybe they'll say, pay attention to the person speaking, things like that. Or for younger students, they might say, walking feet, no running, things like that. And so you'll write down your classroom expectations, and then hopefully you'll put them on a poster board and hang them somewhere in the classroom where your students can see them and where you can remind students about those expectations, especially when their behavior starts getting a little bit out of hand. You say, okay, remember, in our classroom, we use quiet voices and walking feet, for instance. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about planning and preparation. This is essential to effective classroom management. As a teacher, it's really important that you come into your classroom prepared and with a plan for instruction. So how do you do that? By using a lesson plan. A lesson plan in your classroom really can help you establish exactly what your own procedure is as a teacher and help remind you of what instructions or expectations you have for students. So we're going to talk through this example lesson plan, and this is a lesson plan that is available from the Kiowa Language program, and this is a template. It's fillable, and reach out via email so that you can get a copy of it if you don't already have it, or you can access it on the Google Drive. So we're going to talk a little bit about lesson plans and how lesson plans can help you with your classroom management. So first of all, in the middle part of this lesson plan, there is a portion that says teacher instructions. So this is where it's a good idea to include a schedule of learning activities for that class period on your lesson plan. And this will help you keep on track and keep the students on track, especially if you know what activities you want to focus on for that day. Say, for instance, your class period is a 55-minute class period, or maybe it's a 90-minute class period, or maybe you're an infant or toddler teacher and you have 15 minutes with the students to do something as a large group as they're transitioning to another activity. Or maybe you're a preschool teacher and you want to do something really special during circle time. So these are all things that you can think about, and think about the schedule and the flow of the learning for the students that day. And writing this all down on your lesson plan is going to be crucial because this will help keep you on track, give you a reference point. And if students find that the activity goes too fast, or maybe they're really engaged in it, you can decide what other elements you want to focus on during that class period. So it's really important also to set a goal specific to your lesson for that class period. This is your learning goal for your students. It's always important to have a learning goal, and this is what you want students to get out of regarding your lesson and your focus for that day with them. The next thing is to establish success criteria. How will you know if students have achieved the learning goal that you set for them? Well, that's what success criteria are. Success criteria let your students know what successful learning will look like. And these are typically written in the form of I can statements, like I can repeat and produce the appropriate way to introduce myself in Kiowa. Things like that. So learning goals and success criteria are super important to ensure that your students are moving along in their learning and also their developmental continuum. Another idea on your lesson plans is you can ease into the day with an activity to get students engaged in their learning. And like I said, if you have a middle school, high school, or elementary school class period, like 55 minutes long, then it's a good idea to start off with a prompt, such as a bell ringer or an entry slip activity. And this would be the very first thing that students would do. Maybe it's something that you have them do while they're entering into the classroom and everyone's getting settled down. So this serves as a check-in to basically engage students in your particular class. And also engage them in Kiowa language learning. So you're focusing their brains. You're helping students to kind of focus on the class that they're in at that moment. And then when you design your prompt or your entry slip or your bell ringer, you want to also make sure it's very intentionally connected to your goal and your success criteria for that lesson for the day. So try to think of something that will activate the students' prior knowledge of that topic, but also engage your students in learning so that they'll be ready and willing to listen and engage and discuss during the day, during your session. It's also a good idea to have a quick way to assess your students' learning with an end the day activity like an exit slip, an exit ticket, or a reflection journal. And if you work with younger children, you can set out a learning center that has some materials in it that are related to the learning that went on that day. And you can observe the students and see how they engage with the materials. An exit ticket or a reflection or an exit slip is a really good way to collect a quick formative assessment on your students. And you can also, it helps you evaluate whether or not your students have achieved your success criteria that you've established for that particular lesson. And you can also use the information you get from these quick assessments to be able to identify what support or additional strategies that you might bring to the classroom in the future to support your students' learning and development. For more information on lesson plans, we do have a training on how to complete a Kiowa language lesson plan, and we will put a link to a few other trainings in the description. So let's think more about planning and preparation. So planning and preparation include managing transitions and disruptions and set expectations for your classroom. Names are power in the classroom. Address students by their name. Access a seating chart ahead of time, or if it's your classroom, create a seating chart. You could also create name tents for your students to grab on their way to the desks and to set on their desks or tables so you can quickly connect the face with the name, especially in the beginning of the year. Also, identify common times for student disruptions and behaviors, like when all the students are entering into the classroom, or when you shift topics during your class period, or when you're wrapping up a lesson or class time. Also, be ready for behaviors from the outside world, so outside your classroom. Be ready for those behaviors to be brought into the classroom. Plan to engage your students immediately with opening activities like do nows, bell ringers, knowledge checks, entry slips, journaling, etc. Another strategy in a Kiowa language classroom is engage your students by immediately talking to them and greeting them in Kiowa language as they're entering the classroom. It really shifts their brain from their English language brain to their Kiowa brain, and it turns their Kiowa language brain on, and then you really get them to think, oh, I'm in Kiowa language class now, and there's a set of expectations in Kiowa language class. So that's something to think about. Regarding routines and structures for expectations in your classroom, you'll want to develop a routine with students at the start of the class and the end of the class so that students know what to expect. So when students enter your classroom, if your expectation that English stops at the door of the classroom, then you want to make sure your students understand your expectations for them. If you have, if your routine is have the students engage in a bell ringer activity, then you'll want to ensure that students know the expectations, like get out your computer and start typing, or get out a piece of paper and look at the question on the board and start writing. You also want to be effective when giving students instructions. Keep your instructions short, clear, and concise, direct and to the point. Do not repeat directions over and over, and provide students with directions, visual or written, for students to reference, and provide the opportunity for students to acknowledge understanding of the instruction given. Some more information on routines in the classroom. Ask for students to hold a thumbs up, a thumbs down before moving on. Designate areas of the classroom for students to access so they know where to grab a slip of paper, book, pencils, where they should leave papers, get their folders, etc. Circulate in the classroom when students are engaged in activities or working in groups. Teachers can use circulating to gauge time needed and to answer individual questions from students. When students notice that you're right there next to them, they tend to be a little bit more engaged in the discussion or the activity. Also, conference with your students regularly. Spend time individually with a student. This has huge rewards for later. So for instance, you could choose to set aside 3 to 5 minutes a day to speak to certain students about an assignment, or ask, how's it going with an assignment? It's really important to ensure that you intentionally engage with all students over the course of the week. And that's also important to make sure that students don't think you're playing favorites. So really think about ways that you can engage your students, get to know them, and check in with them so that they can feel that you're supporting their learning. Let's talk about observations and documentation in the classroom. Effective classroom management involves teachers who continuously observe and document students' learning, reflect, then act on noticeable patterns and behaviors in a timely manner. Positive rewards allow you to record student behaviors, such as having logbooks, student contracts, tickets, charts. And you could also include parents and guardians of students by using an opt-in program to keep parents updated on classroom activities. You could also use emails for documenting direct communication with students or with parents. And it's important to observe students and notice the way that they are engaging or not engaging in the classroom activity, in the learning activity. And also this will help you think about how can you modify or adjust the activity for the future based on your observations. And your documentation helps you to understand both individual learning as well as small group and large group and whole classroom learning. Really helps you understand how students are progressing along your expectations for their learning in your classroom. You'll want to take note of general patterns by documenting how students behave in an assigned period of time. So you might want to notice, when are students most active? Is it after lunch? Is it before lunch? Is it the first 10 minutes of class? And when should you introduce new material? Which day of the week? What minute of the class? So really think about how you can adjust your own routines as a teacher based on observations that you make of your students. You want to look at how students are engaging with each other and how students are engaging with you as a teacher. You can time transitions, so you can plan accordingly. So allow yourself time for that entry or exit ticket. Allow students time to settle into their group work. Make sure that you are allowing them time to transition from one activity to the next. You also want to notice and record the combinations of students. So when they are allowed to choose their own groups, who works well together? If you choose the groups, then who should be working separately? Timeliness is critical in classroom management. You'll want to deal with minor problems as soon as they appear, because dealing with the issue is super important before the issue escalates even farther. So make sure you take care of behavior issues as soon as they pop up. And it's important to address things head on, refer to your classroom expectations, remind students of the expectations, or if you had your students sign a student contract in your classroom at the beginning of the year, you can remind them. And then if your student continues behavior, then you'll want to make sure that you pull that student aside individually so you can discuss your expectations for them. And if it escalates, then you would want to communicate with the student's family in order to come up with a behavior plan and expectations for your classroom. So let's talk about some strategies for classroom management. So effective teachers use classroom management. So here is a quote from a researcher in 2020. Successful student learning depends on a teacher's ability to manage the group as a whole, keeping the attention of students, whether there are 10 or more than 30 in the room. Understanding how to incorporate social emotional learning can help redirect negative or distracting student behavior. When teachers appreciate the critical importance of social emotional learning, they can better implement the 4 principles of classroom management in order to optimize student motivation, student engagement, and ultimately student achievement. And then I wanted to share some comments and thoughts from a survey of teachers. So this was a survey of teachers. Over 700 teachers contributed to this survey from across the United States. And these responses were combined to determine 5 major principles of classroom management. One quote is, effective classroom management requires awareness, patience, good timing, boundaries, and instinct. There's nothing easy about shepherding a large group of easily distractible young people with different skills and temperaments along a meaningful learning journey. And so really thinking about how you can support your students and move their learning along. So principles from teachers to other teachers are take care of yourself. And this is in order to take care of your students. To learn effectively, your students need a healthy you. Get enough sleep, eat healthy food, take care of your own well-being. These small steps will add up to give you improved executive function, greater empathy, and increased resilience, which will empower you to make better decisions when confronted with challenging classroom decisions. Focus on building relationships. Have rapport with your students. Be consistent but flexible. Love them unconditionally, but hold them accountable. Give them voice, but be the leader. You could greet students as they enter the classroom, check in with them, and so on. You want to also set rules, boundaries, and expectations and do it early on in the school year, in the day, in the classroom. Students don't thrive in chaos. They need some basic structure and consistency to feel safe and to focus. Maintain a culture of mutual respect. Be predictable. Follow through with rewards and consequences. If you say it, mean it. Be clear, proactive, and be consistent. Model appropriate behavior. Your attitude determines the tone and environment of your classroom. If you want calm and productive, then project calm and productive to your students. Take a strength-based approach. When you connect with your students, it makes everything smoother. Find ways to make your hardest student your favorite student. Find the root of the problem that may be causing or contributing to the behavior. Be aware of unconscious bias and cultural differences that these, you might have these situations come up, and you want to be aware of your own biases and any cultural differences that you might have. Also, involve your students' parents and guardians. Use apps like Remind or Class Dojo to reach out to parents and inform them about classroom activities and even student behavior. Send home messages about both positive and negative behaviors. Let parents know so that they can provide support to you as a teacher. Here are some guiding questions to think about in your classroom. Who is responsible for setting the rules, routine, and procedures in the classroom? When and how should the teacher implement the rules, routines, and procedures? What is the purpose of setting rules, routines, and procedures? So you think about these questions as you design your own classroom management plan. So for managing yourself, here are some things to keep in mind as a teacher. You want to make sure that you can be fair. You can also need to be firm and strict. Also be friendly, be optimistic and determined, maintain a professional image, have self-discipline and good manners, and model these things for your students. And follow the law of compassion. For appropriate student behavior to support that, you want to actively monitor student behavior, develop active eyes, and also, like we talked about earlier, walking among the students is a good way to monitor student behavior. Preventing is better than controlling. Enforce classroom rules promptly and consistently from the first day of school when those students first step into your classroom. Ensure that they understand that you have certain expectations for them and that they'll need to follow them when they're in your classroom. Make it clear to the students of the consequences. Make sure that your students understand the consequences of not following the rules or procedures or expectations in your classroom. And reduce classroom disruption by creating an environment conducive to learning by removing distracting material. If you notice that maybe you allowed students to keep their cell phones on, but you notice maybe some students are taking cell phones out during group activities, well, then you might need to create an environment conducive to learning by having students put their cell phones in a cubby or a basket or a box when they walk into the classroom so that they won't be distracted. Things like that. Let's think about some techniques for motivating students. So you want to demonstrate good active listening when students are speaking. You want to also use positive comments about students' abilities. Be aware of and note improvement, not just perfection. Provide extensive, frequent, and specific feedback to them. And provide reinforcement, verbal and nonverbal. Use words of encouragement with your students. Here's some examples. Solha, which means that's the way. Getagya, which means wonderful. And you could say things like, you're on the right track. You're doing a great job. Now you figured it out. How did you do that? Tell me about that. Keep it up. Good thinking. So really think about words that you can use to encourage your students. Here's some other ideas for words that you might use with your students, like Honde Onde, or you're getting better every day, or way to go. Keep on trying, Bete. You've got it. You're very good at that. You're learning fast. That's quite an improvement. Keep working on it. You're getting there. Make note of some of these words and remind yourself to use these with your students. Here's some strategies to promote positive classroom management. You want to show a caring, respectful attitude towards your students. You want to listen to your students when they tell you their concerns and their perspectives. Use as many first names of your students as you can. Try to be positive in your attitude and approach. Cultivate a friendly but respectful relationship with your students. And take time to get to know your students. Here are some additional strategies to promote positive classroom management. Be on time and start the class immediately as a teacher. Have something for your students to do at the very beginning of class as they transition into your classroom. Have a lesson plan and inform students of the way the day will progress. Apply the rules and expectations of your classroom consistently. Vary the types of classroom activities. Don't just do the same thing every day, but make things different. That'll keep them engaged. Prepare assignments that are appropriate for your students. This is where it's really important to know your students and to also know the developmental level and developmental learning style of your students so that you can prepare assignments and activities that are developmentally appropriate for your students. Now we're going to think about language learning and classroom management. So here are some strategies that you can use specifically in language classrooms. So one strategy is to use total physical response, also known as TPR, where teachers model the use of physical movements with the language and students are engaged in active learning. So this is where you're using your whole body to engage students in language learning. Also, teach content, not grammar or vocabulary. Content helps students apply their language learning and also helps them with their confidence in speaking. So instead of focusing on grammar rules or vocabulary, teach your content, whatever it is, through your language. Incorporate numbers into learning. You can use dice, playing cards, clocks, in order for students to practice using numbers in your language in Kiowa. Also, use music to teach the language. Encourage students to sing and learn songs. Model singing in your language. Songs can reach different learning styles and can help to model grammar rules. Use Kiowa Sign Language. Exaggerated body language can help when speaking only Kiowa. So if you have a classroom and your expectation is that you only speak to the students in Kiowa, then use Kiowa Sign Language. Use your body language in order to make sure that students understand the meaning of what you're saying in Kiowa. Play games in Kiowa. Give students small group activities to complete to practice language use. And here's an example of students who are practicing singing in Kiowa. So some more strategies for language learning and classroom management. Repetition is the key. Research says that a person needs to say something in the language at least 400 times before they attain fluency. So repetition. When giving instructions in Kiowa, say it at least 2 different ways, and use your exaggerated body movements or use sign language. Repetition will help students associate unfamiliar words with familiar words and help them learn new vocabulary through natural associations. Encourage students to use help phrases to ask questions and get help from the teacher. And we're going to go over the Kiowa help phrases here in a moment. Use signs and pictures throughout the classroom to remind students of your expectations and different aspects of Kiowa. You'll also want to encourage students to produce the language. So encourage them to speak in Kiowa. Remind students that the Kiowa language is for communication and encourage students to use the language throughout the class period. Give students feedback on their language use. Include setting consistent expectations and make sure that you have expectations of repetition and practice of pronunciation of sounds and words. And allow students to suggest ideas for learning content. So let's talk about how you can use the Kiowa help phrases. Use the Kiowa help phrases for students to stay in the Kiowa language as much as possible. Introduce the Kiowa help phrases early in the semester or early in the school year. Repetition is key with these help phrases. Have students practice many times with the teacher and practice using these help phrases with each other in small group conversation and activities. Model using the help phrases with the students. Use the help phrases with the students and encourage students to use the Kiowa help phrases. So here they are. Hatsawanatongya. This is what you would say when you ask for a direct translation of something. I don't know, help me. This is something that you say when you're lost or confused. This is when you want to ask something. This is when you want to tell someone something. Or this is when you want something repeated. This is when you're checking if you're right or wrong. And this is a good phrase for students to check if they're on the right track. Hai, when you want someone to slow down or speak more carefully. Heita or heita gun when you want someone to wait or stop. Tamopa. This is when you want someone to slow down or speak more carefully. Obaha, ahodebatha. That's the end of our training session, and we're going to put this survey link in the description so that you can click on it and make sure you verify that you took this training for your credentialing. We appreciate your time, and we will see you again soon. Obaha.